Welcome to day two of Insight. My name is Amir Schechter. I'm the Executive Director at Convergint Digital Transformation Team, leading the solution enablement effort. Thank you for joining us today to discuss the future of industrial transformation. It's a really key topic that was enhanced during COVID-19 crisis, constantly evolving, complex, with impact on people, companies, economies, global markets, and technologies. The session will address the growth of the fourth industrial revolution, where manufacturing, factories, logistics, and other industrial environments are finding new ways to drive efficiency with the use of automation and technology, from quality assurance to worker safety, process monitoring, to technologies like computer vision, location intelligence, IoT, 5G, robotics, and blockchain are transforming how industrial environments deliver business results. Joining me today are three industry experts that will shed some light on this topic. The first one is Stephanie Grisafi. Steph has been with Intel for 21 years and is a global manufacturing sales director within the Internet of Things sales organization. She leads a global sales team of manufacturing industry experts across the Americas, Europe, Asia, tasked with driving Intel sales strategy, orchestrating the ecosystem, and building Intel's industrial leadership. Steph is also a passionate advocate for diversity and inclusion, serving as the board chair for the sales and marketing group at Women at Intel Network. We also have with us Matt Powers. Matt Powers is the vice president of global technology services at Anixter. Matt currently manages Anixter global field engineering team, with a network of engineers supporting physical security, data centers, building technologies, and industrial control and networking. Lastly, we have Steve Washburn. Steve Washburn is an executive director of business development for Convergint Digital Transformation Team. Steve is responsible for business development, team management, and performance of all digital transformation sales activities across Convergint local, strategic, and global business units. Steve helps customers migrate from on-prem technology solutions to cloud-based solutions using Microsoft Azure or AWS cloud services, while introducing the latest AI and machine learning technologies to help customers become safer, more secure, and more profitable businesses. Welcome and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. We have a lot of questions. We have a lot of things to cover, so I'm just going to jump right into this session, which hopefully it's going to shed some light on this amazing topic of smart manufacturing. So Steph, I'll start with you with question number one. Steph, can you provide a smart manufacturing market overview from Intel's perspective? What are the main trends? What are the primary goals and business drivers? And what industry will be transforming first?
Sure. Thanks so much, Amir, for having me here today. So at Intel, we see four main drivers that are really pushing transformation in the manufacturing industry. The first driver that I would call out would be the human element. We definitely have an aging workforce, and we're seeing workforce attrition in manufacturing. Those people that are retiring are taking decades and decades of experience with them, the knowledge that they've built up over those years on the tools that they were working on. Manufacturers are also trying to recruit new talent, and this is a big challenge, especially if you have remote locations where that manufacturing is happening. There isn't necessarily always a desire to move to a remote location. And folks that are graduating, some of the millennials that are out there, they're used to communicating in different ways and interacting with technology in different ways. So they have a certain level of expectation of what that should be like. There's also humans are now starting to work alongside robots, and things like functional safety or technologies like augmented and virtual reality are changing how humans work and interact with technology. Then the second driver that I would call out is around market factors. So a lot of companies have corporate sustainability goals that are pushing them to reduce waste, drive green manufacturing, and utilize clean energy. You know, Intel has one, our Rise 2030 goals, and we're seeing a lot of our customers have similar corporate challenges that they're trying to address there. We also see an increased demand for customized products and services, as well as a geopolitical appetite driving the need to be the leaders in manufacturing. And they're incentivizing some companies to shift the location of their manufacturing. And then, you know, there is a complex ecosystem that is that is set up to deliver solutions in the manufacturing space. And so some of the solutions that are delivered are custom or proprietary solutions, and they're just not as flexible. So, and they're not as desirable because they're not as flexible. Another driver I would call out would be security. So as we continue to put more intelligence at the edge, that opens us up to potential vulnerabilities, and security really must be at the foundation of the solution that's implemented. Cyber attacks are on the rise. We, you know, all see headlines related to those. There was the recent one on the Colonial Pipeline. So it's something that's absolutely at the forefront with decisions that are being made here. And then I'd say there's just broader industry disruptions like what we saw with COVID-19, with the pandemic. That really drove the need for, you know, worker safety was always top of mind, but this was a different type of safety that you're looking at, with taking temperatures, ensuring employees are staying socially distant. It also, I think, drove the realization a lot of companies were looking at how to remotely operate some of their factories, and Intel has set up like that for some of our factories. And it just made that much more pronounced when that capability wasn't necessarily available. And so I think we'll start to see some adoptions of remote operations now as we come out of the pandemic. And then there's geopolitical tensions that are out there that are disrupting the industry, and then new technologies. And I know you've got, I think, a question on that we can dive into a bit later. So the customers that Intel's working with, they're really asking us to help address these challenges, and they want to provide solutions that will help improve their worker safety and productivity, improve their output and yields, improve their operational efficiency. They really want to reduce their waste and have a flexible operations. So at the end of the day, what we're doing here is, you know, we believe that applications are going to continue to move closer to where data is being created. So they're going to be aggregated, those applications, to increase the flexibility, to drive adoption of brand new use cases. And, you know, at the end of the day, our goal is to make the edge more intelligent in order to help analyze data at the site of where the production is happening, and then take action based on the insights that are gathered. So that's what I would say, Amir.
Thank you, Steph. Matt, same question to you. What Anixter Wesco sees in the market?
Thanks, Amir, for again having me on the panel this morning. You know, it's interesting. You look at this IoT world, smart manufacturing, or any IoT segment. I would say, you know, it's been a journey, and there's been a lot of challenges that we've all faced as we've tried to figure out this nebulous thing of IoT, right? But I would say the market, what we're seeing in terms of the trend is the market is definitely hitting an inflection point. There's, you know, Steph talked about it. You know, you look at COVID-19, and COVID-19 drove a lot of technology into the smart manufacturing arena. And I think it drove the end user confidence, because we've seen technologies now. Granted, when COVID-19 first hit, it was a very race to technology and just deploy it. And I think over, you know, probably a 4 to 6 month period, we really saw IoT start to be injected into those COVID-19 technologies, like Steph was talking about, the body temperature screening and occupancy, social distancing, some of those those technologies that allowed us to get back to work. So we definitely see the end user confidence increasing. There was always a stat that was out there, and I can't remember where it's from. I'm sure a lot of you have heard it. When you look at IoT platforms, and whether it's the manufacturing space, there was a high failure rate of proof of concepts. And I kind of look at that for two reasons. One is a lot of times proof of concepts, they live and die in that stage because of the technology feasibility and the financial feasibility of deploying that solution and trying to get scale, right? The other hard part is, how do you recognize what that return on pain is, or that return on investment? But we're seeing now that shift. We're seeing stabilization in the IoT platforms. We're seeing partnerships that are happening with companies like Intel, and partnering with different manufacturers and bringing together solutions. Steph hit on this. There's a lot of proprietary solutions out there that are very turnkeyed, but they're not scalable. And as an end user, especially in a factory environment, you're going to have multiple stakeholders that need to come on board. And these solutions that we're seeing today are very stable. The partner ecosystems have been developed. The other interesting things that we're seeing is companies like Convergint, that SI community is getting more comfortable with these solutions. And it is true integration that we're seeing with these platforms. Every customer is different, right? No matter what factory floor you go into, you're going to see different needs, different requirements, and different challenges that you have to overcome. So we're definitely seeing more success in the space as we continue to move forward. The other thing that I would say that we're seeing as a trend is, there's a shift in the mindset of some of the manufacturers. Hey, yeah, I want to focus on, creating operational efficiency in the factory floor, improving my overall equipment effectiveness. But we're also seeing manufacturers look at new revenue streams. How can I capitalize on IoT and create new revenue streams that are going to drive more money into the business, right? And how can I continue to differentiate myself? So, if you look at how software develops today, if you go back 2 years, it took months to years to develop solutions. Today, with microservices and containers, Kubernetes, we can do things so much faster now in terms of developing solutions that show a quick return for that customer. So I would say, you look at one example, like we do a lot of work with OEMs, and you think of that business mindset change that we're seeing as a trend, and creating new revenue streams. We work with a compressor company that manufactured compressors. Well, the end users, the consumers of those compressors, they didn't necessarily want to buy the equipment. They wanted the compressed air, right? They wanted to consume the compressed air. So how do I consume that as a service? So you're seeing the dynamics change from CapEx models to more OpEx models, leveraging equipment as a service, software as a service, managed services, as we start looking at how this market, is really going to accelerate. And I would say, again, just hitting back on, the market is truly at an inflection point. That confidence level is increasing. The capabilities at all the levels are increasing. The big thing, too, the trend that we see is a lot of the manufacturers are really honing in on specific areas where they want to focus and drive change within their business, versus when we were, very early on in this IoT world, everybody tried to do everything at one time, right? Which created a lot of problems for us. So, those are some of the things that we're seeing on our side, just to complement what Steph had said as well.
Thank you, Matt. And just to build up on that point, I think that one of the things that I want to make sure that we emphasize or give examples are kind of the use cases, because really to have a successful deployment of any of those solutions, you really need to first look at a business, what needs to change, how to drive value. So Steve, where do you see, or can you give us some examples of use cases that made change and drove the value the customers are looking for, just as an example.
Yeah, Amir, thank you. And I think both Steph and Matt have alluded to this, that all of these use cases are very specific and unique to each of their individual companies or needs. And as a Convergint, our roots and our core is electronic security systems. So most of our colleagues always think, well, we're a security company, but what's morphing, and Matt sort of alluded to this, as these IoT companies, and really that's what we are. We deploy mission critical IoT technologies at scale globally. Anywhere, any place in the world, we can deploy it, support, and maintain it. And so as these technologies are evolving, the use cases are moving outside of that core fire, life safety, security thing that we do every single day. One of my favorites is actually the safety use case when it comes to machines, as Steph was alluding to, where all of a sudden maybe a human's working side by side with a robot, or maybe there's just a hazardous environment that we want to make sure that a person isn't doing something that puts them in more harm, right? That's a very, very common one. It's something that most people can grab onto, get excited about. But there's also use cases that are pretty compelling about making sure the quality of the product that goes out the door. We're seeing this in the food production industry, actually. They want to make sure that the product that goes out the door, both from a packaging perspective, but also from a contents perspective, are maintained at whatever quality standards they want to see. So it really begins, what I like to talk to people about is just kind of open up your mind. Think about what concerns you have, what problems you might be seeing, and then let's talk about how we can solve that. Because as Matt alluded to, the technology's there, it's matured, and I think more and more people are willing to have those conversations today than they were, even a year ago.
Thank you, Steve. I think that makes a lot of sense. So, Steph, can you also give us this example from Intel's perspective?
Yeah, sure. We've actually, I'd say recently, been doing a lot of work with customers as it relates to making, to help them with intelligence at the edge. So they're looking for ways to be cost effective, yet gain that intelligence. And so one example that we had done recently was working with Audi, the automotive manufacturer. They were looking for ways to help enhance and improve the quality of the products coming off their production line. And in one of the factories that where this solution was implemented, they have 1,000 cars that they produce, 1,000 vehicles every day. And each of those vehicles has 5,000 welds to assemble that vehicle. And the process when we had first engaged with them to look at that quality control, it was a manual process where they'd pull a vehicle off the line, or a small subset of vehicles off the line, and then manually inspect those welds each day. And at the end of the day, what they really wanted to be able to do is inspect 100% of those welds, look at every car that was being produced, and then have a really high degree of accuracy in that inspection to make sure that they were catching any errors within each of those cars. So they had engaged with Intel to help look into the data that was being accessed, the data that was being generated, label the data that they had. We helped them with that, identifying the type of data that was needed in order to do that defect detection, and then analyzing that data at the edge. And we had a few solution architects working with them to really pull together an AI-based predictive analytics algorithm to label these defects in real time. And they, pulled together a holistic hardware and software platform to deploy that. And it was pretty incredible to see the results that they were able to deliver. So not only did they increase the scope and accuracy of their quality control, so it wasn't limited to just a handful of vehicles, they were now looking at all of the vehicles, but it also resulted in a 30 to 50% reduction in their labor costs, which at the end of the day enabled them to be more proactive when addressing defects in welds and avoid reactively trying to figure it out, once production was complete. So that's one example.
I think that's great, because that's where the power of the solution that brings a true ROI. And I think that this is where the thought needs to be put up front of what problem you're trying to solve and what solution we're putting in place, and measure that. So I think that's a great example of the power of technology. Matt, do you have any examples that you would like to share?
Yeah, I would say some of what Steve was saying and Steph was talking about, you look at, IoT use cases that we're really seeing take off are health and safety, right? Very pandemic driven, right? A lot of that drove it, but you're seeing IoT integrated into these health and safety apps, where I can tell if there's fluid on the floor, I can do PPE detection, I can look and see that employees have 3 points of contact when they're climbing ladders. You think of compliance within a factory environment. Technology is enabling that use case for compliance, health, and safety as we see it. But tremendous adoption of those health and safety technologies. I wouldn't, not just within the manufacturing community, but across the board in all segments. Some of the others that we're seeing is, when you look at the overall equipment effectiveness in a factory floor, that OEE number that everybody looks at, how do I get to 85% or beyond, right? If that's possible, and leverage IoT to create those insights to improve that equipment effectiveness of those factory floor assets. So we're seeing a lot of interest in that. One area in particular, we were working with a customer on is just raw material yield, right? How can I reduce scrap? How do I reduce the amount of materials I'm using? We've had applications where, leveraging machine vision, leveraging a variety of different sensors, and just looking at the data, right, that came out of the PLC, the historian, and truly understanding that application, you can see we were able to make a 20% reduction in raw material usage, or that end user was able to do that. So OEE is a great one that we're seeing. The other one, as we start looking at these factory floors and building out solutions, is leveraging digital twins, right? So how do I create a digital twin of my environment? How can I leverage that to, try things out and simulate different applications before I actually physically do that? So digital twins are a big one that we're seeing. Getting into predictive maintenance, track and trace, those are all big use cases that we're seeing right now. And again, going back to what Steve was saying and what we were talking about earlier, a lot of the technology is starting to stabilize. We're seeing great results come out of these different solutions, but it's, it is very challenging in some cases as you get into more of the complex use cases.
I agree 100%. Just also was an interesting article about crane operators that's going to do, to Steph's point, everything remotely. So you don't have to climb up to the crane. You're going to have, you're going to use a VR technology, 3D, all cameras and sensors, and you're going to have not only a safer environment, but you're going to have a much more productive environment where you can operate those cranes all remotely. So obviously those technologies, and now the maturity is there. It's just a matter how you apply it. And I thought that it was a pretty interesting use case. So talking about technology, Steve, what are the one or two or three technologies that you see are going to make the most impact in the near future on this intelligent manufacturing?
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to our Intel friends right here. They've got an amazing depth sensor camera, and this camera is able to do not only visual feeds, which of course most of our customers and most of our colleagues are familiar with, but the ability to use, whether it's LiDAR or just some amazing software with multi-sensor heads to create down to basically the millimeter, centimeter type of level accuracy. I mean, we're working with not exactly per se a traditional manufacturing application, but we had a customer that was using a robotic arm, and they needed to make sure that robotic arm didn't damage another piece of equipment, right? Well, how do you do that at the level of accuracy that's needed in a very variable environment, right? Well, using some of the depth sensor technology from Intel, it's just truly amazing what becomes possible. And that example you shared, Amir, about kind of operating these things to just very microscopic type of precision without having some of that additional complementary technology. I don't know how you're going to be able to do it, right? Because there's only so far you can start to measure and I'll say understand what the built world is like versus the digital world, as Matt was saying about the digital twins. So I think that's going to be a really key technology that we'll see getting interjected in these applications more frequently, working side by side with traditional video cameras, but just providing more insight, more information, and more data.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. Steph, any input from Intel on the future technologies or what's trending?
Yeah, so from my standpoint, I think the two biggest areas would be artificial intelligence and 5G. And AI, we talked a little bit about before with the example that I had given around Audi. But I think manufacturers are going to continue to want to use things like machine vision, machine learning, and deep learning to figure out what's happening on the operations side and making those adjustments in real time. So we're starting to see that come to life today in some factories. 5G, I think this one's a bit, it's early on for 5G, but I think this is really going to change things as it becomes ready for industrial deployments. Having that capability for a wireless infrastructure is going to, really drive that flexibility and help manufacturers reach that goal of a more autonomous factory. So I think this, 5G will really help enable remote access that we've, just been talking about, remote maintenance, visual quality inspection. There's those high quality camera feeds that you're going to be getting. And then things like autonomous mobile robots, we're definitely starting to see some manufacturers piloting those in their factories and, taking specific routes through their factories. And there's a lot of communication that's going to need to happen as part of that. So, I think this is something that will come over the next few years. It's definitely still early on, but I believe that manufacturers do see the benefit of bringing this private network with determinism that a 5G network is going to be able to give them. So I think that will be something that we'll see in the next few years.
Thank you, Steph. Matt, what do you guys see at the Anixter?
I definitely seeing very similar things that Steve and Steph brought up, but I'll throw into the mix augmented reality and virtual reality. I think we're definitely seeing a lot of advancements within that technology. And going back to what Steph talked about earlier, you look at the talent challenges that we have in the industry and how do we augment what we're doing today and how do we bring more expertise into the factory or into any segment that we operate in, whether it's a mentoring opportunity because we're all virtual or in hybrid environments, and how do you get that training? How do you implement predictive maintenance? It's great to know that, hey, something's going to fail in the next 2 weeks, the next month, and now I have to go out and repair it. How do you ensure that I can go out and repair it and have the right person with the right knowledge and the support that they need to impact that? And just training in general. And you look at the SI community, or you look at the manufacturers that are out there. How do you train your staff on the technology? Technology is so complex now; it's getting smaller and smaller. So how do you work with that technology So AR and VR is definitely an area that we're seeing significant investment. And I would say, in addition to what Steph was talking about 5G, that's going to really accelerate the mass adoption of IoT, right? And I think the factory floor, that factory of the future completely changes with the dynamic of private LTE, these private networks that 5G is going to enable us with. You think of the high reliability, the high density of solutions and low latency that we need in those environments. Automated, vehicles that are autonomous vehicles that are driving around. The last piece I would throw in there, with 5G, you look at multi-access edge computing, right? That ability to do more at the edge and create that near real-time experience for all of the technology, and especially, very important within the factory environment. But I would say those are some of the specific areas where we're seeing some advancements on the tech side.
It makes total sense. Just after the session that we had yesterday, this is our second session. I got calls from actually a fairly large bakery that wants to turn the whole process into a technology bakery, right? So using thousands of cameras and sensors to really monitor the process. To Steve's point, to have the QA in place, to have the whole process being accurately measured and efficient. To turn their operation into a smarter operation. So I think that all those examples are fantastic. And also, well, there's an example from Amazon that they're trying to invest, the $300 million to reduce the injury rate. That they're protecting their workforce and reduce their injury rate by, I think, 50%. So obviously that's going to include training and some awareness, but there's definitely also a technology component to make sure that they're not doing repetitive work for too long. They can track the performance. They can track some of the hazardous location. They can utilize technology in a way that's going to augment it, because we all agreed here that workforce safety is a key component, and we're looking at technology to augment some of that, whether to help some of the tasks, like Steph was saying, with robotics, or just monitor some of those conditions in a way that's going to just reduce risk overall. But all great opportunities and example. But with that comes also a risk element. So Steph, maybe I'll start with you. What do you think are the risk elements that we need to be aware of when it comes to transforming our business and making it more automated and technology dependent?
Yeah, thank you, Amir. I think that, one of the bigger risks that I see related to just technology and implementing a solution that's not scalable. You really need to have a clear roadmap of how to get from a pilot or the proof of concept to scaling, and then incrementally take the steps to get to that. So that whole crawl, walk, run, you don't want to start running right away. And you also really don't want to start without having that end state in mind of what is that broader, that challenge that you're trying to address, and then work your way towards addressing that. I think when folks just start out with, hey, we're just going to get insights here without having that end state of what they're trying to help their business obtain, those don't end up being scalable solutions. And then, I think another risk is just more competitive. When companies are slow or hesitant to transform and to embrace new technology, they really can find themselves left behind pretty quickly, because as their competitors start to embrace this real-time data, the analytics, they're going to move quickly past those that are relying on old reporting or trends or data that they had from their equipment, rather than current data of what's actually happening in their factories right now. And I also think that companies that are slow to transition and are, behind this adoption curve, they miss the opportunities to have access to the data streams and trend analysis that they didn't have before, that also could impact their ability to improve their customer experience or offer value-added services that could create new revenue streams for them. So I think those are some of the risks I would call out.
100%. Steve, any thoughts from your end on risks?
Yeah, Steph did a great job of hitting a number of them. And I think what I would add to that is a couple of pieces. One is the speed and pace at which change is occurring with this technology is faster than what most of our consumers are used to dealing with. Matt alluded to it a little bit earlier that, with some of this enabling technology, these microservice types of technology, the speed and pace of innovation is just really accelerated beyond what at least I've personally been used to. And, some of these technologies, I think some of our buyers, they expect this stuff to last 10, 15 years, and the shelf life on it is really much shorter. Probably need to be thinking about a 3 to 5 year window on it. So it goes into just a faster life cycle on all of this technology is one, so that obsolescence risk. But the other thing that I think is really occurring on risk is the end users, the consumers of this technology are pushing that risk off onto us, the integrator, right? They just want to consume it. Just Matt said it earlier, there's a big shift occurring where I don't want to worry about managing all this hardware or all this software. I just need the business benefit. And the reason that's happening is because of the speed of change is occurring so fast, right? So it just gets into this really difficult position for these organizations to consistently be, allocating capital on something that, in all honesty, it probably should be an operating expense, right? Because it aligns directly with the goods or services that are being produced. So those are two risks that I'm seeing occur. One, this obsolescence risk where people think this technology is going to last, 7 to 10 years, and it's just not. And then really pushing that risk onto the integrator saying, hey, you guys take this, you manage it, just give me the outcomes that I need, and everybody's happy.
Thank you, Steve. Matt, any thoughts?
Kind of in line with Steve and stuff, some of the things I look at are, stakeholders, your partners within your business. The nature of IoT and digital transformation and Industry 4.0, whatever you want to call it, it can get very challenging very quick, and you need adoption from all of your stakeholders in the business that you're partnered with. The opposite side of that is you have to have partnerships outside of your business as well. And that's critical. The supplier ecosystem that you're working with, the SI community that you're working with, that's a tremendous part of the solution. And I've seen so many companies try to do everything in-house. And I think that's why we've had a higher failure rate, because it is complex. It is difficult to bring everything together and interface it together. This is a multi-manufacturer world that we live in. To turnkey these different solutions becomes very challenging. The other part that I look at is it's the thinking process, right? We used to live by waterfalls as we project manage different opportunities. And now the thought process has shifted to more of an agile approach and design thinking. And that's really, I think, helped accelerate IoT. When you think of rapid prototyping, failing forward, and building these solutions, getting to that MVP and picking to what Steph was talking about, what is that end game? What is that desired state you want to get to? And have that clear vision and work toward it. Keep that iterative approach once you get to that MVP and build it is a big thing. And then I would say that probably the biggest concern out there is cybersecurity, right? That's a risk as you think about the sensors that we're deploying and how that attack surface is expanding. I would tell you that, in terms of the development of cybersecurity solutions, whether you look at Intel or any of the manufacturers that are out there, software, hardware manufacturers, the SI community, that is very stable today, but it is something you have to take very seriously when you look at IoT. Now, I remember back early on in the physical security days, cybersecurity really wasn't that a big priority, right? And we saw, as a result, we saw a lot of risk and things that were happening to these different companies, but that changed very quickly as priorities shifted. Cybersecurity became a big piece, and it's, with any connected technology, cybersecurity has to be a primary thought process, especially in the OT world. When you look at operational technologies, the IT world's got it figured out, but when you look at the OT technologies, you really have to focus on cybersecurity. But the technology is there, the partners are there, your stakeholders are there. Those are the things that, how you can mitigate risk, I guess, long term within your strategy.
Couldn't agree with you more, Matt. I think I'm just going to pause just for a second because we have, I think, a question that is kind of related to those to the risks. So the question is, with change occurring so much faster, is an overall plan even more important, i.e., program management, to ensure effective use of capital? And I would argue or extend on it. It's really the incorporation. We talked about it, bringing the users in. Make sure that the solution and the user experience is going to be efficient and effective, and not create an environment that is way more complex. And I think, Matt, we talked about it, and you alluded to that point earlier. There was the CNBC kind of piece that there was like $1.3 trillion that was invested in digital transformation. And based on research done by EY and some others, almost $900 million is some massive percentage of this 1.3 was basically a waste, which means that failed POCs, wasn't really wasn't well thought through or managed or just executed. So I think that obviously those are the type of risks that we need to include overall. If it was that simple, everybody could have done it, but transforming a pretty traditional, I guess, a pretty traditional that a human centric operation into something that is a lot more automated and a lot more technology centric really takes good planning time and strong collaboration. So thank you for the answer. I don't know if anybody on the panel has something else to add to that, but I thought that question was pretty spot on. It's not going to happen in a fast pace, or it's not going to happen by one individual suddenly driving it. It really takes a massive team to make that happen.
Yeah, I would just echo that, and the whole process, the thought process as you look at these projects and try to manage them has to change. And is it a capital expense or is it an OpEx expense, right? And what's the best use of my capital to maintain and support these solutions long term, and how do I scale them, right? So those are things to look at for sure.
So just picking up on that point, we have a lot of existing facilities and some new facilities. Like Intel is creating some new facilities here, new production facilities for all those microchips that we're missing here in the U.S. market. So, Steph, what would be the difference or the approach or the thought process behind modifying an existing facility versus building a new facility?
Yeah, I think as you look at, if you haven't, which majority of people have existing facilities that they're working from, I think a lucky few have new facilities that they get to start with. But for the majority of folks with existing facilities, I think, the top two things that are top of mind when they are looking at transformation is the cost and wanting to just cause minimal disruption to what's going on in the factory floor. So I think, what you could do is start with bringing in some incremental compute to add in new capabilities or insights into what is currently happening in the factory. And then, you'd evolve to a more intelligent compute at the edge. And I think starting in areas where it's less critical, like final assembly or packaging, is a good place to start in the factory, so that if something does break or isn't working, it's not the end of the world. And then, as you see success and gain more confidence, then naturally progressing that over a period of time into other parts of the factory. And as you look at designing a new factory, I think the thing that you want to do is bring in open platforms that have the ability to evolve. You don't want closed systems that you can't add to. And ideally, you want to have that IT and OT infrastructure just aligned and integrated right from the start. So using things like soft PLCs instead of hard PLCs or the fixed function devices is a great place to start. And I think that can all enable you to do a faster, transition to just getting started right away with a more intelligent factory.
Thank you, Steph.
Yeah.
Steve, to the same question from your perspective, especially when you use all the capabilities now with edge devices and the capability of edge devices, or maybe also referring to a potential expansion of the traditional, chief security officer. How can really security, and you mentioned it before, really, have a bigger impact on automation and industry overall? So what do you think are the opportunities there?
Yeah, I think Matt hit on it when he was talking about engaging all the key stakeholders, right? So a lot of times the security people, they tend to be the owners of the cameras, right? The owner of the sensor that everybody wants to latch onto and leverage and use. So the security people get really asked a lot about, hey, can I use your cameras? Where do you have the cameras? How do I add more cameras? And I think it is important that as, I'm going to say security professionals, we understand how we fit into that ecosystem. And we're looking for those innovation leaders in our department or in our companies. We're staying abreast of some of these topics and things that we're talking about, because usually at some point in time, somebody will raise their hand, somebody will ask a question, and the security people will get thrown into the mix because of the expertise with the cameras. And so I really liked how Matt framed that to build those relationships, get the conversations going internally, and really just, I'm going to say, think creatively, right? Because you never know what those next evolutions of those systems are going to look like. And, the alarm monitoring centers, or the SOCs, or the fusion centers, that's a really interesting area too, because as we're talking about the cybersecurity, as we're talking about the device management and predictively managing when these devices are going to fail, well, all of that stuff needs to be monitored. All that stuff needs to be managed, right? And if an organization has an SOC or is thinking about building an SOC or putting up what we would call a fusion center, right? Thinking about how all of these pieces can go together. And then if you need to segment what information is being delivered to a respective stakeholder or user, you can do that, right? So those are some of the things I would add on to what Steph was saying there, Amir.
Good point, Steve. Thank you. And I think that's you turn it into mission critical components, mission critical systems. So obviously, it's like if you take our email away, we're like, okay, what do we do now? So the dependency obviously needs to have also a plan on how to make sure that the uptime is adequate. Matt, any thoughts on the existing facilities versus new, how to approach those two?
Yeah, I would, as you look at the factory floor and automation of the factory floor, it's been going on for a while. I think a lot of the larger manufacturers have definitely embraced. But if you look at the mid-tier and smaller manufacturers in those legacy facilities, to what Steph was talking about, that's the nature of the beast right now, is these legacy facilities, and how do we enhance them, make them smarter? The first thing that I would look at is there's a ton of data You don't know if it's good data or not, but there's a ton of data within the historians, within the PLC. So these closed loop systems, how do you connect them? How do you start pulling the data out? The other thing that I would look at is, the challenge you have to navigate a lot of times are the automation protocols. And there are translators, there are gateways, different devices that allow you to connect all that data in, and you can start normalizing that data, aggregating that data. The other part is how do you create more contextual data within that environment and start augmenting your factory floor with sensors, right? So you can add third-party sensors and deploy a sensor network. I would tell you that, patience is a virtue as it relates to IoT sometimes, and sometimes you really have to build up some good trending data as you start looking at, okay, what's that factory look like in a 3-month period, a 6-month period, and how do I build a baseline to know what it is? If you think of, that aging workforce, my dad worked at Caterpillar, ran test cells at Caterpillar, and I could talk to him today, and he's like, I could tell you every sound that test cell made and knew exactly what needed to be fixed. Well, how do you take that, the ears, the eyes, those senses, and put them into your environment and start leveraging machine learning, artificial intelligence to grab those insights, right? And over time, the quality of those insights, the data, it's going to get better and better and better. The system's always learning, right? You're never going to take that system and go backwards with it. With the data, you're always going to get better and better. And that goes to what Steph was talking about. If you don't start looking at that, it's the race to the market right now. And you look at a lot of manufacturers, some manufacturers that weren't leaders are emerging because they're adopting the technology and they're starting to build those efficiencies within their business, build that agility within their business. On the new factory side, that is, hey, integrating OT and IT together to what Steph was talking about and really driving that within the environment. But, those are the things that I would look at just at a high level right now as you start looking at that factory floor and identifying your pain points. What's that return on pain that you want to achieve in that environment and what that end goal you're trying to get to is.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And to everybody, everyone's point, if you look at the EV industry, it's pretty interesting to see all the way of manufacturing cars versus all the new EVs that are coming into market, how they build, their facilities, which completely different approach, much more efficient. I think, Elon Musk was able to have an outdoor facility to, increase its capacity, those things on really unheard of. And I think that this is where you can see really the difference between the capabilities of what's possible today versus the legacy system that we still, for the most part, need to deal with. There's another question that came in about the internal conversation that needs to be had. What are some quick methods and justification to give confidence in a system that has not had a failure as of yet? So I think it goes into the whole proof of concept, the thing that Steph was talking about. Maybe start small, make sure that you build your confidence level before you put it everywhere, in your factory, and then it's not scalable and so on. So Steve, I think that you can talk a little bit about kind of how to treat new technology with POCs and really kind of identifying the right parameters before you go all in.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was going to mention earlier is it is important to start having these conversations or thinking about this evolution of the way you operate your factories, the way you kind of operate your business. It's important to be thoughtful. I think Steph did a great job of making sure that we're really documenting and defining what challenge, or as Matt says, what pain are we trying to solve? But when we go through that exercise and we go through that discovery process, putting that on paper, and then really testing and experimenting, right? And a test and experiment is just that. Yes, you hope for a certain outcome, but don't be discouraged discouraged if you don't get that exact outcome. And I mean, patience, I loved how Matt described patience, right? Patience is important, but if people aren't starting to experiment or at least have those conversations and think through some of these things, and some of these experimentations can just be exercises of thinking too, right? I mean, here's what I want to do, here's how I would go about it, this is where I'd like to go, and then, you know, kind of reaching out inside the organization and really testing the waters a little bit, seeing if there's appetite for, hey, are we willing to do some of these things, or are there some other things that we haven't thought about that might say, no, we don't want to go down that effort. And then once you build that consensus internally, going into a lab, going into a test environment, really driving, improving some of those efforts and the results. I think Matt alluded to it earlier, and ROI and justifications get very challenging on some of these things at some times. And obviously that's important to us as business leaders. We want to make sure we're spending our capital, our time, all of our energy wisely, right? So those are really important things that need to be, you know, tested, validated, and thought through. And I'm sure both Steph and Matt have examples of where they've seen that work well, or maybe not quite work as well as we would all like to see.
Thank you, so Steph. I know we have 4 or 5 minutes, so I'll start with you. Any thoughts, any additional thoughts on what Stephen or the question of how really to make sure that you're not rattling the cage and and going backwards instead of forward when implementing technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is just starting small and having that end state in mind. And I know they mentioned quick methods and justifications, having that internal justification. I think part of it goes back to maintaining the competitive edge. It's not just the justification of you haven't had a failure in your factory yet. You have to continue to compete to stay, for your business to continue to grow. So I think that's one of those justifications that should be used when you're having that conversation internally about making an investment and looking at doing change inside the factory. But it's really starting small and having that end state in mind of what specifically are you trying to improve in order to continue to keep you competitive. So that's what I would add.
Matt, any final thoughts before we adjourn? I think that's an important question because we talked in several other sessions that you have to have, like Steph was saying, small goals. Steve also identifying the the RI, but small chunks, prove the value, and move on. Be very agile in the way that you move forward. So any final thoughts from your end?
Yeah, the one thing that's been interesting to me on kind of my IoT journey is this whole concept of design thinking, right? And I think it's bringing the stakeholders together. It's having empathy for the problems, the pains, the challenges that maybe your workers have or your coworkers have as they're working within this environment, how you can improve. But that helps you really formalize what you're trying to focus on. The last thing I would say, because I've done it myself, as I'm building a strategy for IoT, I try to do too many things at one time, right? I have this work stream going, 50 different work streams going for 10 different use cases that I'm trying to work on, and you just can't do it, right? So if you're looking at building confidence, get those base hits, those quick wins, and really identify, even though it may be the small things, but those are the ones that are going to drive back value and help you drive it up the chain too within your business to get more support. And I would say today that is in your pocket, the support, because I think IoT has been talked about enough, digital transformation has been talked enough about where the consumers are the stakeholders, the C-level really is understanding why they need to invest in IoT. So those are some of the things that I would point out.
No, great points. And unfortunately, we ran out of time. This discussion is probably going to continue for a long time. This is probably one of the areas in the industries that are going to change the fastest and the most with the most impact. Manufacturing, logistics, and everything associated with that. So, Steph, Steve, Matt, thank you for your time. Thank you for whoever attended the session. Hopefully, it was beneficial, and enjoy day 2 at the Anixter. So, thank you again. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.